Hello, everybody. Greetings from Vilnius. My name is Violeta Davolute. I am teaching at Vilnius University, and I'm also one of the editors of the CEU book series, Memory, Heritage, and Public History in Central and Eastern Europe. It is my great pleasure today to moderate a discussion about a fascinating new book published in the series. The book is written by two wonderful scholars from working in two different countries. Misha Gabovic is a historian and sociologist. He is professor of multilingual and transnational post-Soviet studies at Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz in Germany. Mykola Homaniuk is a sociologist, geographer, and theater maker. He is an associate professor at Kherson State University in Ukraine. So two scholars from different countries wrote together a book that is titled Monument and Territory, War Memorials in Russian-occupied Ukraine. Misha and Mykola analyzed the processes of monumental memorialization on occupied territory during the first year of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It's incredible, but it's been almost 3 years, and this horrible war in Europe is still taking place. The word territory is key here. The two authors cover those territories of Ukraine that came under Russian control after 2022. They explore the social life and biographies of war monuments, especially focusing on rural areas, that is, small towns, villages, and the outskirts of cities. The book also delves into larger scholarly debates, more theoretical scholarly debates, developing unique insights that have broad application to scholarship in other parts of the world, I believe. And this is a genuinely interdisciplinary research, including visual studies, history, digital ethnography, and on-site ethnography. As one reviewer said, it's memory studies at its finest. As one of the co-editors of this book series, I can say that we were extremely impressed by the monograph. We also were very impressed at how quickly the two authors were able to produce such a thoughtful, empirically rich, and polished work. This is a timely and necessary intervention on a tragically relevant topic. And also would like to say that the book, to remind you that the book is available open access. You can download it. A couple of colleagues of mine actually downloaded it today, and the paper copy will be published at the end of this month. So, but before I go any further, let me just explain how we have structured this session. We have a total of 90 minutes, and we'll reserve the second half of this time for Q&A session with the audience, so you can ask any questions you want, and the authors, will be able to answer it. So for the audience, once again, your mics and cameras will remain disabled for the first half, but you can submit questions whenever you like using Q&A chat. When we start the Q&A session, you can then unmute and activate your cameras for what I'm sure will be an extremely lively and interesting discussion. So without any further ado, then, I will give the floor to Misha and Mykola. They will give a short presentation of the book and the overall argument. It will take about 10 minutes. Then, taking my privilege as a moderator, I will ask 4 or 5 questions, and then that's it. The floor is yours, and then, Q&A session. So, Misha and Mykola, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Mykola is very modest, and he has asked me to do the short presentation of the structure of the book, which I will now attempt to do by sharing my screen. Can everyone see this presentation?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, wonderful. So this is just a short overview, really simply to give you an idea of how the book is structured. So here you see a rough table of contents with the 8 chapters. We start with a brief introduction and then a theoretical chapter, which we call Theorizing the Monumentscape. And without going into all that much detail of what we mean by that term, essentially our challenge was to write about a situation where there are not just a few monuments of a certain type, but literally tens of thousands. One of our observations going through a lot of the literature on monuments in general and war memorials in particular is that usually people pick out a few prominent monuments, typically those located in large cities or in very well-known locations, and then they write about them sort of implicitly generalizing to the situation in an entire country. And we felt that that is not something that we can do in the Ukrainian case, because in Ukraine, there are tens of thousands, perhaps as much as 50,000 monuments to the Second World War alone. And many of them are actually relevant to our argument. So it was important to us to think conceptually about how to describe a situation where there are so many different monuments, and essentially all of them, at least all of those monuments located in the occupied territories, are relevant to our study. So in this introductory theoretical chapter, we try to think about what that implies, and we talk about what we call the monumentscape, which is basically the entirety of these monuments, but also their relationships with each other and the way in which they structure people's relationship with the landscape and the territory. Then we have a long chapter that provides historical background about war memorials in the entire 20th and 21st centuries in Ukraine. And here also we start essentially from the ground. So once again, unlike many authors who have written about Ukrainian memorials, from a sort of a top-down perspective, starting with large narratives about history, about the Second World War, etc., and then trying to see how these are implemented in memorials, we start actually from our fieldwork, especially Mykola's fieldwork, and we look at what kinds of monuments actually exist on the ground in Ukraine and different regions of Ukraine, having to do with different wars and different periods of Ukrainian history. And we find a landscape that is extremely complex and that can really not be summarized in kind of a few short observations about large historical narratives, because people are much more inventive in how they build monuments locally, but also how they interact with these monuments and the kinds of relationships that they develop with them. And what you can see here are just a few of the many, many examples that we provide in the book of how people have domesticated both older Soviet-era memorials and newer ones from the post-Soviet period, for example, by adding photos and stories of individual soldiers to monuments atop communal graves, by adding building materials that are typically associated more with sort of home renovation rather than the kind of sublime architecture that we expect of war memorials. But we also discuss many, many other ways of domesticating monuments, be it by adding religious symbols or by hybridizing monuments to different wars, for example, adding portraits of soldiers who died in the ongoing war to memorials initially dedicated to the Second World War, etc., etc. So that kind of lays the groundwork for the story that we then get into about what happened after February 2022. And another important aspect of this, and this is something that Mykola has worked quite extensively on, is polychromy, which is really something that's very, very specific to Ukraine, especially certain regions of Ukraine, which is that people express their kind of respect and veneration of war memorials by painting them in lots of different colors. And this is something that we get back to in a later chapter. So then we have a separate chapter called Monuments Destroyed, Spared, and Stolen, where we try to review systematically what the Russian invaders did, starting in the very first days of the full-scale invasion in 2022, with monuments in the occupied territories, which includes both destruction, both inadvertent and deliberate destruction of memorials, including both Soviet-era memorials to the Second World War or the so-called Great Patriotic War, but also the deliberate destruction of almost all memorials that featured any sort of Ukrainian state symbols. But we also look at some interesting cases where monuments were spared from these destructive policies, and some also intriguing and almost bizarre cases where the invaders actually stole monuments and took them back to Russia or to other parts of the occupied territories. So this is maybe a kind of an expected aspect of Russian monument policies in the occupied territories, but something that perhaps for many of you will be less expected is that they also almost immediately engaged in monument building policies, or rather rebuilding or renovation policies. And this is because part of the argument, part of the justification for the full-scale invasion was that supposedly, according to the Russian narrative, Ukrainians had been busy destroying Soviet-era memorials to the Second World War in the period of Ukrainian independence, or at least since the Revolution of Dignity in 2014. And actually, this is largely untrue. Monuments to the Second World War, unlike some other types of Soviet monuments, were in very good condition in all parts of Ukraine. But this was such an important part of the Russian narrative that even when the Russian soldiers arrived in Ukraine and discovered monuments that were intact and were in good shape, they had to find a way to sort of prop up this narrative and show to a domestic audience back home, using all sorts of online and offline propaganda channels, that Russia was now back, so to speak, and renovating these damaged memorials. And one of the ways in which they did this was by rekindling eternal flames, because the eternal flame had become a very important symbol of this kind of Soviet-Russian memory of the Great Patriotic War. So what they did was that they started installing or rekindling eternal flames all over the place, including at memorials where no such flame had actually existed, even in Soviet times, which led to this really strange phenomenon of temporary eternal flames, with a kind of gas line installed just temporarily to create a picture of an eternal flame that is now burning again for a Russian domestic audience just for a few days. But what they also did is that often in place of destroyed Ukrainian memorials, they very, very quickly built some new monuments of their own, such as this gigantic equestrian statue of the Russian medieval prince Alexander Nevsky in Mariupol, of all places, a town that the Russians had almost entirely destroyed during their invasion, in the place of a former Ukrainian monument to Ukrainian soldiers who died in the anti-terror operation in Ukraine's resistance against Russia since 2014. So these are kind of detailed empirical chapters about different aspects of monument policies on the ground. But then, as we looked through all the material that we had collected for this study, we also realized, oh, sorry, just one more thing maybe I'll add, is that these practices of polychrome painting that I had mentioned at the beginning were also taken up by the Russians and the Russian proxy administrators. And even though they had previously said that this is something that's kind of anti-Soviet and unacceptable, when they found these practices on the ground in the occupied territories after February 2022, they sort of took them and ran with them and started presenting them as their own. So the narrative became the evil Ukrainian nationalist government banned local patriotic residents of these regions from expressing their respect of Soviet-era memorials, and now Russia is back and allowing this. And the practices that Russia is allowing and kind of presenting in their propaganda channels were in fact practices that had been developed in independent Ukraine as sort of a grassroots way of interacting with memorials. So having described all that, we then looked at the material that we collected, and we realized that there's a very interesting story to be told from the perspective of visual semiotics about how photos and videos of war memorials circulate on both sides of this war. And looking through them systematically, we realized that there is a fundamental difference. So both sides, both the Russian invaders and the Ukrainians, do use visual materials of war memorials quite a lot in order to sort of support their narrative of the war. But in the Russian case, and I'm dropping some of the nuances here, but the angles used to create these photographs very often support kind of a hierarchical vision. So there's a lot of use of low angles with monuments dedicated to the Great Patriotic War, the Second World War, in the background on top, sort of denoting a superior position in the hierarchy, and the living present day soldiers are in the lower position, often emulating the poses of these monuments. So there's a clear visual narrative of a hierarchy between the heroic generation of the Second World War and the present day Russian army that, in a sense, needs to repeat the feat of arms of the Red Army in the Second World War and kind of conquer what the Russians declared to be the new Nazis or the new fascists. And there's a lot of examples of this kind of visual presentation. Whereas on the Ukrainian side, very interestingly, although war memorials from the Soviet era are also used quite a lot and sort of used to prop up the Ukrainian narrative of resistance against, German fascism then and Russian fascism now, the visual presentation is much more horizontal and much less hierarchical. So very often you see these kind of selfie-style images where the most important thing is to show the present-day living person, and the memorials kind of are in the background, and they're at the same height, on the same level as the speaker, to the extent that if this requires, for example, cutting off the head of a statue, then this is done, as you can see in this image. So war memorials, and sometimes the same kinds of war memorials, are very important in the visual narratives of both sides, but these visual narratives are very, very different. One is hierarchical, one is much more egalitarian. And then finally, we also discuss in some detail the Ukrainian, but also international response to the invasion. So the Russian narrative was that a lot of Soviet war memorials had already been destroyed in independent Ukraine, which can actually be shown not to be the case. But then in response to the invasion, some Ukrainian regions, but also some other countries, really did start toppling not just Pushkin statues and Lenin statues, but also some Soviet war memorials, because these had now become very closely associated with the Russian invasion, because Russia, of course, discursively kind of recruits these memorials into its own version of history. But we show that there is a lot of regional variation in the sort of new Ukrainian iconoclasm, and it actually only happens systematically in one, maybe two regions in Western Ukraine. And in many, many other cases, it's much more haphazard. And in fact, a lot of local Ukrainian residents continue to identify very strongly with these memorials and see them as representing not just Ukraine's defense against fascism in the Second World War, but also Ukraine's continuing resistance against foreign invasion. And then we show that, in fact, this narrative that you often see in the Western media, that there is now a systematic iconoclasm all over Europe as in response to the invasion, is hugely overblown, because there's only a relatively limited number of countries where Soviet war memorials have been toppled more or less systematically in response to the invasion, and in most other countries they are in fact left intact. And then we also talk about the new monuments that have now been built, or that are continuing to be built in Ukraine to memorialize the resistance against the Russian invasion. And we also talk a little bit about how they are articulated with the older monuments, for example, to the Second World War or to other conflicts in which Ukraine has been involved in the 20th and 21st centuries. And then finally, we have a separate chapter that discusses and analyzes different practices that are related to war memorials, especially in the occupied territories. So all the different rituals and practices for which the invaders used these monuments as backdrops, starting with giving medals to soldiers, the so-called Immortal Regiment, which is a procession that commemorates the fallen of the Second World War, but also things like events for school children or even very young children who are taken on field trips to Great Patriotic War memorials to be taught a particular narrative about the continuity of the Second World War and the current Russian war. And we also discuss kind of the evolution of different symbols related to war memory that originate from the Soviet period and have evolved in different ways in Russia and in Ukraine, and also differently in different regions of Ukraine. And then in the conclusion, we reflect once again about the relationship between what we call the monumentscape and the way that different people develop different relationships to a landscape. And in particular, we argue that for the Russian invaders, there was a kind of curious dynamic between familiarity and strangeness, because they thought that the kind of memorials that they discovered in Ukraine were essentially exactly the same as the ones that they knew from Russia, and so this created a kind of familiarity in a territory, in a landscape that ultimately was much less familiar to them than they had expected. So they had thought that Ukraine was basically just another version of Russia, just another kind of post-Soviet country where they would be welcomed with open arms, and which structurally was very similar to Russia. And then they discovered that actually that was not at all the case. They were not welcomed. The landscape was different. It was unfamiliar. So in order to preserve a little bit of that supposed familiarity, they kind of clung to these memorials, which they thought were the same as in Russia. But then, as we show throughout the book, in fact, the memorials themselves and all the practices that had developed around them in post-Soviet Ukraine made them very different from what the Russian invaders had come to expect. And so we use that observation to reflect a little bit more broadly about the relationship between monuments, territory, landscape, and what we call imperial irredentism, which is essentially the use of heritage for the justification of invasion. All right, so I will stop here. This was just a very brief glimpse into the structure of the book. And if there are questions later on, we can also show more visual material.
Thank you very much for this really succinct but very dense presentation. But I will start now with a very simple question. This book is born of war, and it was written during the time of war. Here in Lithuania, I think all of us remember exactly what we did on the 24th of February, 2022. So my question is, what did you guys do? And also, how did it happen that the two of you come together? You work in different countries, how did you team up? In other words, what's the prehistory to this book? Who would like to answer that? The question to both. Maybe Mykola? We cannot hear you.
Sorry?
No, now we can hear you.
Okay, I will start. I remember this day. I remember the day when I met Misha, and I remember the February 24, 2022. Then I was in a night train. I was traveling from Kiev to Kherson, and early in the morning, in the sunrise, I watched first how the airport in Mykolaiv burned, and then how the airport in my city of Kherson burned. And when I came to my city, I have seen how a huge number of people live in the city. But I decided to stay at home. And of course, from the first days, my friends and colleagues from all the world started to call me, started to write me, offering the help, different type of help. And one of those people was Misha, and that's how it all started. But I was wondering because I didn't know Misha very well. We just had just one meeting via Zoom and then quite short conversation. But this first, this is Zoom will elaborate from fruitful collaboration, and now we have a book. That's all.
Thank you. Misha, do you want to add something to that, to the story?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I was living in Berlin at the time, and on starting in the morning of the 24th of February, I just tried to do everything at once. I wrote to everyone I know in Ukraine, and I tried to sort of drum up support for Ukraine in the media, and started helping refugees a little later, etc. And when I wrote to Mykola and asked him, just like I had written to others, asking how I can help, I think that was actually a few days into the occupation and into the invasion, and Kherson was already occupied. And he said, what would really help would be to show to people in Kherson that we are not forgotten. And his idea was to create something like an academic airlift, which I think we called the academic bridge. And we ended up organizing a 10-day marathon of Zoom lectures in Ukrainian and in English for students and scholars at Kherson State University who were trying to, keep the university going despite the occupation. Which was a very important experience, and that really gave me a sense that this is finally there's something that I can do that will actually help people, at least psychologically. And then after that, we continued talking, and obviously Mykola was in occupied Kherson. I was really worried about him, and the Zoom conversation that he mentioned, which was back in 2021, was basically about our shared interest in war memorials. And so as we continued talking, we realized that the invaders are really expending a lot of effort on interacting with war memorials, which was really surprising because, we thought they would have other things to do. And we decided to basically monitor this. And initially, it was just going to be an article that we would maybe write together. But then, as the material accumulated, and Mykola really collected most of it, and we started going through it together and sort of trying to see the patterns that emerged and writing about this. Very quickly, we realized that it would have to be a book because there was so much to say about this.
Extremely interesting visual materials as well. As I was looking through all the visuals, absolutely incredible. Very, very valuable. So next, my question is to Mykola again. So Mykola, you worked online, right? And on site. So capturing, extremely fast paced, things changing, right? Some of the monuments were spontaneous and they don't exist anymore, right? Like you captured some that do not exist today, if I understand correctly. And at the same time, you also lived in Russian occupied Kherson, right? And then in a Kharkiv bomb shelter during this research. These are extreme conditions for academic work. So please tell us more about how that field work actually went and about doing research in the middle of hot war. It's like not, kind of like war correspondence in a way, it's like a very specific situation. Please tell us more about that.
Thank you. Yes, the field research is very important part of our book. But firstly, I would like to say that I didn't work alone here on the field. I suppose we work together, directly and indirectly. Directly, Misha also visited Ukraine during the war. We first met in person in Odessa in 2023. And Odessa, as you know, is one of the Ukrainian cities that was constantly shelled and bombed during this war, and continue to be bombed. And as for field work in war conditions, I have even several practical advices based on my personal experiences and based on our experiences. Firstly, you need to have if you are working in the field during the extreme conditions, the war conditions, you need to have a partner who is in the safety place, safety side. Misha was in Berlin. It's quite safety side. So why? The partner colleague have to have a backup copy of the collected data that will not disappear in the case of arrest or something dangerous, death, or I don't know, of some other reasons. It guarantees the collection will not be lost in this case. So the remote partner is very important part of this team. The work algorithm is follows: collecting the data. On the same day, you should transfer all collected data to the partner and delete it from all your gadgets. It's quite dangerous to have a smartphone full of such photographs, not such photos, all such photographs in your pocket. I think you understand why. So secondly, first very important thing is security. This is not second, at first. Yes, you can risk your freedom of your health. This is your personal choice, but you cannot endanger the object of observation. In this sense, monuments are quite convenient object of observation. It's difficult to put a monument in jail, but if you are in Turin taking photos with real people during the commemorative events, or you taking an interview with people, it can endanger them. Not only interview, but respondents too. And this can lead to tragic consequences. For instance, I know how people who took part in commemorative events and after they have been identified and persecuted. And their third rule in for field work, you have to not attract attention to you, and you have to be always ready for any complications. You have to be aware of that. For me, from my experiences, I had several cases when everything could have ended badly. In one case, my acting skills helped me. As you remember, I also a theater maker and run a small independent theater company in Kherson. And acting skills helped me. And another case, my bicycle helped me to escape, to be arrested. And one of the very important things how to walk in extreme condition. First of all, field walk is not a sort of academic feat. This is a very important way how to just maintain your own mental health. In our case, in my case, doing something useful. In our case, working on the book, first an article, as Misha said, and discussing with Misha, discussing the current observation. This conversation, this work helped me to maintain my own mental health, my own mental balance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
This is my life hacks for field work.
Thank you. Misha, would you like to add something? You know, I saw your photos from Odessa, I mean, they're in the book and elsewhere. So you obviously also did field work. What are your experiences? You know, if you would like to add something.
No, I mean, I don't think I really have anything interesting to add to what Mykola said about fieldwork. I mean, I've been to Ukraine 3 times since the start of the invasion, but I was never really in any serious danger. So I don't want to, you know, pretend that I was. The only thing maybe that I'll add to the last thing that Mykola said, which also really resonates with me, is that just like for him, working on this topic was kind of a mental health exercise. So it was for me, because it gave me the sense that I am doing something useful and something specific. And you know, because before that I was feeling, you know, almost burnout, trying to do everything at once and not really knowing how to channel my energies into, you know, helping Ukrainians in a kind of effective way. And when we started working on this project, I also found that, you know, this is something I can focus on. There's someone specific in Ukraine who I'm working with, and you know, maybe something will come out of this which will have a broader relevance. So I think, you know, in addition to the academic kind of relevance of our work, I think it was also a good mental health exercise for both of us.
Actually, I am, you know, your work covers a variety of fields, but I'm most familiar with your extensive research on the history and sociology of Soviet victory monuments, you know, in general, you know, the memory of the victory in the Great Patriotic War in the post-Soviet context. So I would like to ask you, how then this specific research, this specifically Ukrainian case, how did it inform your approach to this, you know, to this work, and also how it perhaps changed the perception of the Great Patriotic War narrative in the post-Soviet context, wider post-Soviet context?
So maybe let me start by saying that I don't really like the term narrative that much.
Okay.
As applied to what we did in this book and also to most of my work. Because people talk a lot about narratives as if there was nothing else out there. Whereas I tend to be much more interested in practices and in materiality. And I think there is more to both of those than just, you know, big varieties of narrative. So that's one thing. And usually when people talk in terms of narratives, very often the analysis becomes a little reductionist, right? So, you know, there's the Russian narrative, there's the Ukrainian narrative, and then we will see how they are reflected on the ground. Whereas I think, just like Mykola, I really like to work from the bottom up, so go from the material and try to do justice to its diversity and complexity. But to answer your questions more directly, maybe I would say 2 things. One is that I've also done a lot of historical archival research about Soviet war memorials, and I think, including in Ukrainian archives, and I think this has really helped me with this project as well, because even in my archival research, I have long developed a sense of the diversity of memorialization and commemoration practices. You know, we often think of the Soviet Union as this sort of monolithic state that had a centralized policy of memory and commemoration. But actually, when you start delving into the archives, especially in different parts of the former Soviet Union, you see that that was really not the case. There was a lot of really interesting activity on the ground, and there was a lot of diversity between different Soviet republics. And also, a lot of different people were involved in building monuments and interacting with them. Except that then, of course, the state had the ultimate power to decide which of these practices would be kind of boosted at the level of the entire Soviet Union and which would be suppressed. And I think that kind of historical background really helped me approach this project as well, because I found that things were very similar when you look at the present day, right? So once again, there is a lot of diversity and a lot of kind of grassroots activity that cannot be reduced to these large narrative and large policies of history. But then at some point they start interacting with these large policies of history. And we have things like, you know, as I mentioned very briefly, Russia coming in, discovering a practice that was previously taboo from their point of view, such as this polychrome repainting of monuments, but then kind of co-opting it into its repertoire. And this is something that you see basically starting from the Second World War itself, all the way to the present day. The other thing, and this is really something that I think Mykola taught me, was that there is some very interesting specificity, some peculiarities in how Ukrainians, especially in some regions, especially in I would say southern Ukraine, partly in eastern Ukraine, interact with war memorials. So once again, this practice of polychromy. I mean, I have also done not just archival research, but also field work in a number of post-Soviet republics, Moldova, Russia, Belarus, the Baltic countries. And I have never seen this. I have never seen this polychrome painting anywhere. You know, sometimes you find cases of people kind of repainting a Soviet war memorial entirely in one new color. But this practice of really turning them almost into comic book heroes in these really sort of garish, multicolored schemes. This is something that I think is very peculiar to Ukraine, and I think that's an interesting observation. That, you know, despite the seeming uniformity of this kind of Soviet material heritage of remembering the Second World War, there are a lot of interesting specificities in each region and in each post-Soviet countries that we need to pay attention to.
Right. Which leads me also to another question. What I found fascinating is that you dedicate a lot, really focus a lot in your fieldwork and analysis. You focus on rural areas, monuments that were erected or destroyed outside of the cities. You also point out that, you know, some memorial practices that developed in rural areas then spread to the cities. I find this a fascinating insight that also resonates, you know, let's say in Lithuanian context, when you think about the monuments to the anti-Soviet resistance and so forth. So could you please elaborate on this and what you have observed in terms of this, movement from the rural to the urban and so on? Yeah. Whoever would like to answer, maybe Mykola? Yeah, Mykola.
Oh, okay.
Fantastic.
I think that the rural areas in Ukraine is not in Ukraine only, are a kind of natural reserve or even natural reserve of memory, or even natural laboratory of memory. Memorials in capitals and large cities are always in the center, not only academic attention, but always in the center of ideological attention, ideological control, and ideological pressure. And for me, then bigger distance, I mean in geographical, physical distance, then bigger distance from the administrative center to certain settlement, village or town, then less ideological control, both from the state institutions and from memory activists. And then bigger distance from the administrative center, then more correctly, let's say, the memory space, monumentscape reflects the opinion, the memory conscience of ordinary people, ordinary residents of that communities. As our research shows, the memory of World War II, the memory of Soviet-Afghanistan war, the memory about anti-terroristic operation. This is the first stage of Russian-Ukrainian war, permanently changing until full-scale aggression, until 2022. It was people rethinking, people grassroots redefine of memorials. This is not rethinking or redefining from above, let's say. I mean, through the state control, through the laws, through the ideological pressure, but it was a rethinking, redefining from below, with the help of grassroots rethinking of memorials. That's very important. That's why I called rural monumentscape as a natural reserve of memory, of natural laboratory of memory. And this is very important. Maybe it also can explain what has happened in Lithuania with, as you mentioned, some cases from Lithuania.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Misha, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe 2 points. I mean, I think I mentioned this at the very beginning of the presentation. I think this is maybe a contribution of our book also to the larger field of memory studies and the study of monuments, which is that there is typically this assumption that when you study monuments, you only need to study a few monuments in, well-known locations in big cities, and then you can generalize about all the monuments in that territory or that country. And I think, our book shows that this is really not the case, and very often interesting things happen in provincial regions and rural areas first. And things that are different from those that happen in large cities. And, we're not the first to notice this. In the Ukrainian context, for example, there's a book by Yulia Yurchuk about the memorialization of the UPA in the Volyn region of Ukraine, where she also shows that, for example, some of the first Bandera monuments were built in villages before they spread to larger cities. But also, once again, historically, I think looking at the Soviet case, this is something that can be observed in the period after the Second World War in the Soviet Union. So, for example, there's this old narrative that there were no Holocaust monuments in the Soviet Union because people know the case of Babin Yar in Kyiv, where indeed, there was a movement to create a large monument to the Jewish victims of, the Nazi extermination in Kyiv, and the Soviet authorities didn't allow it. But then Arkady Zeltser wrote a wonderful book about Holocaust monuments in the Soviet Union and showed that there were almost 1,000 of them, which were all built in, on the outskirts and in villages and small towns, etc., where there was, as Mykola said, less ideological attention. So people could do more things, right? And they developed things there first, which only much later could spread to larger cities.
And also this, Arkady Zeltser also writes about the Lithuanian case, right? But these were also, where the places of mass extermination were, and there were, these kind of spontaneous, if you will, non-sanctioned monuments. They appeared very, very soon, right? A couple of years after the war, or even a year after the war, and there were ceremonies held there. I mean, non-sanctioned, grassroots, right? But it took place basically all the time, right?
And it's the same again in the ongoing war. I mean, most of the fighting does not happen in the largest cities of Ukraine. If you look at all the towns and villages that are occupied by the Russians, there are very few large cities. Mariupol and temporarily Kherson were maybe the best examples, but the vast majority of places occupied and where the fighting takes place are much smaller. So just like in the Second World War, just like in many other wars, a lot of the fighting doesn't happen in the largest cities. So a lot of the memorialization obviously also doesn't happen in the largest cities. And this is something that we always need to pay attention to.
Absolutely, there is a certain urban bias, right? That one needs to keep in mind. So I have a lot of questions, but I do not want to monopolize the event. So I will just quickly ask you the following. So this book will be read by different readers. Some of them will be students of war and memorialization in different parts of the world. So what comparative and methodological insights do you think will be most useful to someone studying similar processes in, let's say, Latin America or Asia or elsewhere? How is Ukrainian case study that you guys conducted is instructive to them? Very succinctly, please.
Mykola, would you like to start?
Mykola disappears.
Okay. I will start, hoping that he will come back. So I would briefly mention past 3 points. One is what we already said about the monumentscape, and I really like the term that you just proposed, this urban bias. Right. So the idea that when you study monuments, war memorials or others, it's very important to think about the entire network of monuments, how they all fit together and where they are actually located, which is not just in big cities. The second thing, I think, and this really, we tried to see if anyone else has written about this, and we found very, very little, is situations where heritage is shared between countries that used to be part of the same entity but are not anymore, and that heritage is now at the center of conflict, right? So, I mean, in the Ukrainian case, it's obvious a lot of the monuments that we discussed were built during the Soviet period when everybody was part of the Soviet Union, and now Russia claims that they belong to Russia because Russia supposedly is the kind of the legitimate heir to the Soviet Union. So what they are saying is, this is the shared heritage, but we are the only ones who know what to do with it, which gives us the right to march into your country, kill you, and control these monuments. But there are other cases of shared heritage. So the British and the French pointed to Crusader castles in the Levant in the Mandate period after the First World War, as one of the justifications that they, as supposedly more civilized kind of white cultures, should go and control the Middle East, because they claimed that people actually living in the Middle East didn't know what to do with these things and didn't treat them properly. But you could think of cases like Rabindranath Tagore, who is important in Bangladesh but also in India. You could think about Simon Bolivar, who is kind of a key historical reference for many countries in South America, and there have been nothing like the military conflicts that we discuss, but there have been conflicts about who actually has a claim to the correct memory of Bolivar among all these different countries. So I think that we need to think more collectively as the field of memory studies about these instances of shared heritage and the kinds of conflicts around them that that can emerge today.
Thank you, Mykola. We are happy to see you back. Would you like to add something? What would be the main takeout from your research to people who would be studying, you know, similar processes, but in other areas? Let's say, I don't know, Asia, Latin America, elsewhere. What do you say, very succinctly?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that despite of many differences, we also have common points. For instance, remains of communist parts. For instance, monuments dedicated to Lenin, and there are still Lenin monuments in Latin America, and in Asia, in Africa, and I'm curious about their destiny, for instance, and maybe people from Africa, Latin America, Cuba, for instance, Vietnam, are curious what can happen with Lenins in their own countries. That's my short answer.
Anyways, thank you very much. As I said, I have many questions, but now it is really time to open the floor to the audience. So now the mics will be on. You know, those who would like to ask questions, please, if you can, briefly, if you wish, that is, briefly introduce yourselves and ask a question. So yeah, now is your chance to ask the two authors questions. Yeah, I can see Johanna would like to ask a question. Please go ahead. Hello, Johanna, I saw the hand raised.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. I didn't realize I had to turn it on myself as well. Sorry. So my name is Johanna Mannegren. I am a professor at Södertörn University in Stockholm, Sweden. Thank you very much for the book, and looking forward to reading that and for this fascinating conversation. First, just a comment. I think that your discussion, just the last bit of the discussion, I think the heritage of monuments in former Yugoslavia has many similarities, and I think that might be a very interesting comparison. But my question is a little bit more broader. Just sort of, if we can imagine a post-occupation future, do you think any ways that this politics around monuments, can you see ways how that can either assist or obstruct in processes of like peace building and possibly reconciliation? Thank you.
Who would like to go first? I see Misha almost saying something. Maybe you would like
No,
to...
I think Mykola is really, I mean, you know, he's actually in Ukraine.
Both of you kind of were about to say something. Okay, Mykola, could you please start?
Now we have very dynamic situation, and Ukrainian monumentscape is changing. There are some regions, especially two regions, when Soldata Pad, like a Lenin Fall, like Soldier Fall, has happened. I mean, Lvivsk and Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast, and what will have happen with the rest of war memorials in the rest of Ukraine, I have no idea. But what I'm observing now, that there is some tangents social, political tensions between that people who suppose that Ukrainians must change memory scape in a very radical way, sweeping all post-Soviet and post-imperial heritage from the Ukraine, and the other part of people who suppose that current monuments, post-Soviet monuments, very important part for cultural heritage, and it's very important part for future rethinking of totalitarian past. And who will win in this situation, I don't know.
Maybe I would add to this. I mean, I think there is a potential for monuments to sort of increase social cleavages, because whenever the radical activists that Mykola mentioned come in and basically demand very quick action, for example, to destroy monuments or to topple monuments, that can create a lot of tensions. Which is not to say that all monuments should, or even all war memorials should be preserved, but I think something that could, on the contrary, kind of create resilience in a post-conflict situation, post-war situation, would be to have really grassroots democratic debates about what to do with monuments. So these are debates that I think, obviously I'm an external observer, but I think they should happen at very local levels. From a comparative perspective, I think countries where instead of imposing a single centralized monument policy, people manage to have very local debates, have dealt best with whatever problematic heritage they had, because people get a stake in whatever ends up happening. Even if the final outcome is not exactly what they wanted, the process itself, and I think James Young and other people who've written about monuments have remarked this, the process itself very often is much more important than the result. And then maybe very briefly about the Yugoslav context. I mean, I've had lots of interesting conversations with colleagues in the former Yugoslav republics, but I think there the situation is almost reversed, because at least after the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s, it was almost as if none of the post-Yugoslav countries wanted anything to do with the heritage of the anti-fascist monuments there. And there was at least a period when they were sort of in a state of decline, and only a relatively small number of activists worked to preserve them. So I think it's almost the reverse case, because almost everybody wants to get rid of these monuments, instead of fighting to sort of control the heritage that's connected to them.
Thank you. We have another question from Daniela, I believe. Are you ready to ask your question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Or maybe you can even see me.
Hello. Yes, we can hear and see you.
I'm very glad to see again Violetta, whom I have known for some time, and Misha, whom I have known for a much longer time, and to meet Mykola, although not really in person. And guys, thank you very much for this brilliant book. It's really very much needed. And I'm also glad that it's open access, so that all of us can circulate it further to our students and our colleagues. And I do believe that this is going to be our very small contribution helping Ukraine, just circulating this book indeed. I will end up with a question, or maybe with two questions, but I would first like to offer my my answer to Violetta's last question about the another comparative context or another international comparative frame that I was thinking about while reading the book. I have not gone through the whole book. I'm at chapter 4, and I had to quit in order to log on to this meeting. But my plan for the rest of this evening, you know, it's to spend the evening with the rest of the book. The rest of the evening with the rest of the book. So I was thinking about a brilliant study by Antoine Post, the French historian, about monuments in rural France, in French provinces, monuments built by the local communes after the First World War. And it's included in that multi-volume collective work directed by Pierre Nora, Les Lieux de Mémoire. And I was thinking about the local agency and the local ownership. And it seems to me, and that is going to be my question now in the context of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, did you observe, I guess this is more to Mikola rather than Misha, in your very risky field work, and thank you for it. Did you observe instances of local memory activism? I saw one photo with a memorial plaque which was wrapped in something black in order to be probably preserved so that the invaders did not notice it or something like that. So can you think of instances of local memory activism and local ownership of these monuments, of their probably preservations? And I also have another question, which is probably to both of you. Do you think that I'm not sensitive to inter-regional specificities, but do you think that some of these, yes, that's the one, the right hand picture. Yes, Misha, thank you. That's it. Can you think that, or do you think that some of these that these specificities that you found are due to the historical and cultural specificities of this part of Ukraine where the war is now happening and the monuments are now being destroyed or changed? Or that would be the second question. Thank you.
Right, 2 very good questions. Who would like to go first?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I observed many initiatives when people try to save, to rescue commemorative sites, especially commemorative plaques, as you saw in this picture. Is commemorative plaques dedicated to fallen in anti-terroristic operation in Ukraine, in Donbass area. Many times, one way how to do it, just to cover by some covering, and the second way, just to take off and hide, I don't know, in ceiling, inside of the building, the side of the school, of public institutions. I observed it in mass in all parts of occupied Ukraine, from the north to south. And I also saw several attempts to save the whole monument by covering this. Actually, it's quite difficult to hide the the whole monument, but people tried to do it. About your second questions about cultural specific of occupied territory. Actually, of course, there is a difference, especially a difference in values, political, electoral behavior, perception of history in this areas, but this difference concern more city population, urban population. But for me, there is no significant difference between population from countryside from different reasons. I don't want to generalize situation in Ukraine, in Ukrainian regions, but the number of common values, common things are bigger than number of differences between people from different regions.
Misha, would you like to add to that?
Maybe just one point. I mean, I think I completely agree with Mykola on this. But on the other hand, I also think that Ukraine, certainly among the post-Soviet countries, is probably the country with the biggest internal diversity. As far as, for example, memory is concerned, simply because it is such a big and such a diverse country. So one of the follow-up articles that we're currently working on together is about sort of the diversity of memory cultures in Ukraine and how they all came together in the resistance against Russian invasion in 2022. And this includes, all sorts of different regional memory cultures. Which is not a matter of East versus West. It's much more fine-grained because a lot of big cities, but also a lot of different regions have their own traditions in this regard. But then there are also memories associated with specific ethnic minorities, the Crimean Tatars, the Greeks, the Roma, etc. There are also corporate memories associated with the police, the border guards, the railroad workers, etc. So I think once you start looking in detail at memory dynamics in Ukraine, you find an enormous diversity, which is not limited to geographical diversity, and that makes it so interesting to study.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions from the audience? I don't see questions in chat. Would someone else like to ask a question? Yes, I see Giorgio. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Giorgio Ruggeri. I'm part of Violetta's team here at Vilnius University working on the Europass project. And actually, I don't really have a question. It's more like a request because I found your work extremely fascinating. Thank you for doing it, for sharing it with us. And I wish you, I wish for this book to circulate as much as possible and to reach not only audiences on the eastern flank of the EU, but also on the other side of the continent where many scholars are still not so, not sensitive enough and not aware enough on how the memory of World War II is central to this ongoing conflict. My request would be, could you conclude by giving us another glimpse into the amazing visual materials in the book by showing, I don't know, one or a couple of case studies. I would be especially interested in interventions on monuments or practices related to them that kind of recontextualize or re-signify the monuments.
Mhm.
So I've just opened the larger presentation that we have prepared for exactly this kind of request. But I'm trying to think about what exactly you mean by recontextualize, because there are so many different aspects to this.
Choose whatever example you find more suitable for this question. I was thinking, but you know, since I have no idea what the other case studies are, I was thinking more in general. Maybe there are some examples that show some. I'm trying not to use the word narrative. So, some cases in which some interventions in the like aesthetic interventions, for example, as the one of coloring the monuments or adding those fences. I saw some fences in one of the first images you showed. Maybe some interventions like those which kind of change the presence of the monument compared to its original look when it was built.
We call it modification. Am I understand correctly?
Yes.
Modification,
Yes.
monuments modification. But we have a separate chapter about modification before full-scale aggression time. And Misha, could you show us the slides related to modification?
We can start with that. Right. Yeah. So these would be examples from actually before 2022. So polychromy we discussed, but also the addition of various objects. But Mykola, you can talk about this.
Yes, we calculated several types of modification. The first one, polychromy. Just Misha, could you show us the pictures, because for me it's quite interesting. The previous.
This one.
Yes, this is a modification from Kharkiv and polychromia from Kharkiv and Kherson region. As you understand, initially the monuments were monochrome, gray, white, or silver or bronze. But this is one of the modification. The second modification is installing the, let's say, false eternal flame. Here you can see the photos from Donetsk region, the plastic eternal flame, and from Kyiv region, when commemorative candle were installed inside of stars, where, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, eternal flame fired. The next modification is setting of national state symbols, Ukrainian flag, Ukrainian coat of arms, trident. And in this picture, you can see on the left picture, this is there are two orders on the breast of the Russian soldier, and initially this also monument was monochrome, and people change the ribbon of Order of Glory with Saint George ribbon to ribbon of colors of Ukrainian insurgent army. This is one of the unofficial Ukrainian symbols. The next type of modification, the next slide, please, Misha. Installing of religious elements, crosses, different type of crosses, Orthodox, Catholic crosses, icons. Here you can see the icons with Holy Virgin with sun, and even in one case I saw a monument with crescent. The second type of modification, the next slide, please, Misha. If
even further, you mean the names?
And this is not this is a very personification of monuments, installing of photos, additional information about people who dedicated, who mentioned in this list, for instance, with days of birth and death, for instance, or the full names. And here you can see several examples from different parts of Ukraine, from Kharkiv and and this is a Kiev region. This is one of type of modification. And what else? And this is not modification, but this is there are a lot of types of interaction with monuments who show us that the meaning of monuments was changing from their site for glorification of fallen to site of mournful commemoration. In this case, you can see monuments with typical commemorative refs, which used during the folk commemoration after the Easter. And the list is quite long. I think I recommend our book to you will know more about this topic.
What I would add, maybe very briefly, is that so we have all these different cases of actual material modification, and this is something that you also find in a lot of other former Soviet countries, with some exceptions, as we mentioned, the polychromy. But then we also have the level of the circulation of visual material, right? So we talked about the kind of visual semiotics of camera angles and things like that. But the other example I wanted to show very briefly is what people do to images of the motherland statue in Kyiv. Let me just get back to that. So this is the largest war memorial in all of Ukraine. It was built in the Soviet period in the early 1980s, and it was kind of terminal to victory in the and at its base you find a museum which used to be the Great Patriotic War Museum. Now it's the Museum of Ukraine in the Second World War, and this the images of the statue have been recontextualized in Ukraine. as symbols of resistance against Russian aggression. And as early as the summer of 2022, there were so many different visuals of this kind, drawings, caricatures, paintings, animes, videos, etc., that this very museum, which is located inside the base of the statue, organized an exhibition of this visual material to show the diversity of ways in which it has been reinterpreted, recontextualized as a symbol of Ukrainianness. And now the Soviet coat of arms, which used to be displayed on the shield of this female statue, has been replaced with a Ukrainian symbol. So this is a way in which what we showed at the kind of very local and rural and material level is also being done at the very kind of national, most visible level.
And the name was changed from Rodina Mать, motherland, motherland, and converted to Ukrainian.
Mother Ukraine.
Mother Ukraine.
Is the exhibition still active? Is it still there? The exhibition that Misha mentioned is
no,
in the
inside
of this.
It's the website where you can see
all
all
right.
these images.
Okay. Yeah, because I know this very well, I think. Yeah. All right. So actually, we have 3 minutes left, and I don't see anyone raising their hand. So I will ask a very, very quick question, the very final question. So, what are your next plans? You mentioned the article together. What else? What are you guys gonna do next?
So we're actually working on 2 articles together, which are kind of a continuation of some of the themes in this book. And also last week, we submitted a funding application to create a joint research center, which would be called the Center for the Study of War, Language, and Memory, together with linguists. And the idea would be to kind of systematize all the material that we collected, alongside some material in sociolinguistics, and kind of create databases and foster exchanges between Ukraine and Germany and future joint research projects.
Right, fantastic. Mykola, do you want to add something? Do you have some other plans that Misha did not mention?
The next article what we're working together is article about different memory perspectives. Actually, Misha told us about this is article about how different memory perspectives, so grammatic, reflect Russia invasion, reflect Russian-Ukrainian war.
We're almost out of time, but I saw one hand. Whose hand was it? And the person who raised that hand maybe can rush and ask a question. Yes,
hello. So first of all, thank you very much for the book. Actually, my question has been just answered because the new article is going to be about the geography of memory regarding the war. And my question was if the memory of the coal miners in the Donbass will also be included, but it can't be the case because it's all regarding the war, I guess. So thank you again.
Okay. So thank you very much. We're right on time. I would like to thank both authors for this discussion, and once again to congratulate you. It's a fascinating book. We're very much looking forward also to seeing the hard copy. And to all of the audience, once again, I would like to remind you that the book is available open access. Once again, Monuments and Territory, War Memorials in Russian-occupied Ukraine. Please rush and download it, share it, spread the word. I have lots of questions. I'm going to ask you guys these questions during our future meetings, okay? Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for moderating.